All right, so what we're covering tonight is lettering and faces. And the reason why I've put suggestions there is because these are all suggestions, and they're not rules. They're not hard and fast rules. They're just suggestions, because as you'll see as we go through, there's not actually a one size fits all rule for the different ways of lettering, the different kind of times that you'll find lettering in the tapestry, and different times that you'll find faces in the tapestry. Can I just a wee reminder just for everyone who's on just now, whilst I'm doing the screen share, if you can put yourself on mute, that would be great, just because we're recording the call, so that we can share on YouTube, and sometimes get a little bit of feedback with microphones if they're on. That would be great, but please do unmute yourself if you want to ask a question as we go through, and or raise your hand or pop a wee question in the chat box. So yeah, so as I said, it's lettering and faces that we're talking about tonight, and is suggestions, not rules, as we'll see as we go through. The reason I chose this, the diaspora cairn, for this slide here, is because it's got both lettering and faces on it, so you can see kind of this the two different things that we'll be talking about. So just some things to consider with lettering. So we'll talk about lettering first. And Andrew, I know that you'll want to talk about this as well. So just please do when you want to jump in. What I've got on here is just it's one of the most important things is legibility, and that people can read what you've stitched. And some of the things that we'll just have a quick look at tonight that are things that legibility is a font type, so using a simple font style, the scale and size of the lettering, where it's positioned, which stitches to choose, colour, and transferring letters to fabric. So just some things that can help when you're thinking about either doing lettering that is already on your panel, or if you're wanting to do lettering for a journey stone, or do lettering that isn't already on your panel. Okay, so first of all, font type, and I've just put keep it simple. And I know, Andrew, you've kind of developed this the sort of style of lettering that
so since I've started doing these tapestries, which goes back to 2010, I often put words into tapestries, and so over that period of time I've really sort of developed a sort of a simple style of writing words into it. Hopefully it's for stitch, so it tends to be quite, I try to make it as clear as possible and as simple as possible. So anything it's fussy, like I don't tend to use lowercase, it tends to be all capital letters, because it just makes it a little bit clearer and a bit easier to stitch as well. But it's all about clarity. It's all about keeping it as simple as possible, and just so it can be read when somebody's viewing it and who doesn't know the words. I mean, they're going to read it in a couple of seconds. It's all, I used to teach graphic design. It was all about that. It's all about legibility, keeping it simple, keeping it straightforward. But at the same time, I realised that sometimes people decorate letter forms and things. So it's sort of, I can talk for this for hours, to be honest. But it's like it's quite an interesting thing when Kirstie started talking about this, doing this talk. But actually, it's simple, but at the same time, it's quite complex.
I know when we were actually chatting about it yesterday, weren't we, Andrew? And it is really interesting when you were saying to me about how long somebody might stand in front of the tapestry and look at it, and if it needs to be immediately clear what's written.
Yeah.
And I suppose sometimes I mean, I think I'm guilty of that as well. You know, you get really into the stitching and think, oh, and you don't necessarily think, oh, actually there's going to be somebody viewing that, and when they are standing there, can they really easily and very quickly read what it says. And so I suppose that's why this tutorial and this session tonight is really all about kind of how you can make it, your lettering, as clear as possible, and kind of in keeping with the design of the font that Andrew uses, because obviously Andrew's honed that font over so many tapestries.
It's not really a font, but it's sort of based on a font idea, but it's sort of like, it's just something that it can be relatively big. It can only go so much. It can't go really tiny, because it becomes really harder to stitch when you start doing tiny type. So it's got to be a certain, you know, there is a certain size which I think it's quite nice where it works. But then you know, somebody can do, and I know there's lots of people putting words into their journey stones and that, and a lot of them have got a really nice charm to them, and they're really fine. You know, there's nothing wrong with them at all. And that's why I think we're both saying that this isn't. We're not saying you should do it a certain way, because I said a lot of the journey stones with the words in them, they look fine. They look really nice. You know, I think it's just to have a chat.
I think that's really important. And I'm glad you mentioned it about so what we're not doing tonight, we're not sort of saying, oh, it all has to be like this, and anything that's done isn't okay, because there's beautiful lettering and lettering. It's just really to
give guidelines.
To give suggestions. If I could just remind, if you've just come onto the call, if you wouldn't mind just muting yourself while we're doing the screen share, that would be great. Thank you so much. It's just for feedback on the recording. If you do want to ask questions though, you can take yourself off mute and ask a question, or write it in the chat box, or raise your hand and we'll see that. It's very much your questions are very welcome as we go through. So moving on to the next slide, just talking a little bit about scale and the size. So we kind of had a look at all of the samples that we'd done between Andrew and I and already, and the smallest size that we suggest for letters is about 1 centimetre high, both for uppercase and for lowercase letters. So whatever you're doing, although as you can see from the lettering that's on the right hand side there, that's in uppercase. It does get, like Andrew said, if you're doing lowercase letters, it can get really it's getting really tiny and can be quite difficult to execute in terms of stitches, and also can be difficult to read as well if it's too small. So a suggestion is to keep the minimum size at 1 centimetre, and then also consider the space between the letters as well. Somebody's asking if you've got the lettering penciled onto a panel, just follow that. Yep, you can follow. Yes, that's the idea, that you would follow the pencil lines. Your Clement rag might be just a little bit less than 1 centimetre. Yes, so you might so you just follow the guidelines that will suggestions that we'll say later about stitches if you haven't stitched it yet, but you might have stitched it yet, and I'm sure that'll be absolutely fine. But what the suggestion is just that if you're writing something on, to steer clear of anything smaller than 1 centimetre, because it gets really tricky. I know who said about it's that it's easier to stitch block capitals, but lots of evidence says it's not more legible, especially for people who find reading difficult. Yeah, that's take your point now that it is actually easier to read lowercase rather than uppercase. I suppose it's a balance between what we can stitch and legibility as well. Right, okay, so the space between the letters, just making sure that you have got that space, that sort of good spacing there. The image that's on the right hand side there has got a space. It kind of varies slightly between 2 mils and 4 mils between the letters. So at that size of 1 centimeter, that kind of spacing is really good. It's just to give you ideas when you're thinking about, if you are going to do your own writing on a journey stone, just thinking about putting that spacing in and thinking about the size. Position is another thing about where there's enough room to fit your letters in and your words comfortably into the space. So if you've got a journey stone, for instance, and you've got you haven't got enough space, and you're having to cram the stitches, the lettering in smaller because you're struggling for space, then you can think about maybe applying the journey stones onto the panel and then using the edge of the stones for the writing. That's what you'd thought, Andrew, as well, isn't it? That is okay to do.
Yeah, I think sometimes, as you say, if you're struggling to put a word in, but you can actually put the word outside the journey stone once you've applied it on to the panel. So you can, if there is space there, you can do that. I mean, it's all very much to do with the stitch you're using and the position of it and the color and the shapes that are around it and everything. So there's no hard and fast rules here. It's all about just guidelines about suggesting the ways that you could do it.
Yeah, and I suppose the kind of the biggest guideline that we're giving is just about clarity, really, and just making it clear to read, so that you can see what the word says, comfortably, because it takes a lot of time to stitch it, so you want to make sure that people can read what you've said. So which stitches? They're not difficult stitches, these ones. They're not. This is for the smaller scale that I would recommend. That you have it when it's small. It does get really quite fiddly, and so just wouldn't recommend something that is too difficult. And you want to be able to get around the different shapes of letters, so the curves and the points. So split stitch is always a good choice because it can cope with different shapes of letters quite easily. It creates a nice continuous line that's clear and easy to read. You can use back stitch and chain stitch if they're scaled down, and I know people do also use running stitch. I think if you're using running stitch just to keep the gaps between it, the stitches as small as you can, because otherwise you can struggle when you're going round curves. So these would be my go-to stitches, and split stitch is the one that I prefer. That's my personal preference. But it's really just thinking about those simple stitches that can work at a small scale, because 1 centimeter is really quite small. So yeah, the one at the top is it's a bit of a combination between a running stitch and split stitch, because you find if you're using a kind of a back stitch and a split stitch, you find as you're going around the curves with a back stitch you really struggle. So that's where I would use a split stitch, but I wouldn't go right into the center of the split stitch, just into the edge of it, so that you can orientate it a little bit better around a curve. So that's just ones that I use, and split stitch is a good one. Couching could work for somebody's asked in the chat. I wouldn't necessarily use couching for when it's 1 centimeter. I think it's that's really still quite small. I think if you're going a little bit bigger, so we're talking in minuscule scale here, because I'm classing small as something that's 1 centimeter, and then anything bigger than 1 centimeter is larger. 1 to 2 centimeters is a larger scale. So I think couching is lovely, and couching can work with bigger letters, but I think for the smaller ones, I think it just gets a bit too fiddly. But I'm not saying that's not a no. Also, that's just I always say just try it and see what it looks like, and if you think it looks really clear, then that's okay. Hopefully that answers that. So upper and lower cases that are larger in scale, so around 2 centimeters, you do get a little bit more choice. I haven't put lots of different ones on here. I've really just put that split stitch at the top, chain stitch in the middle, and then that's chain with a little bit of chain sort of beside it to give some shadow, or just kind of a relief. So you can use, you can use more things when you get a little bit bigger, but even 2 centimeters is still quite small. So I wouldn't go to town on 2 centimeters, but you can use split stitch, stem stitch, chain stitch, heavy chain as well. You can use the whipped versions of those stitches as well. And braided stitches can work well too. I think if you've got much bigger, there isn't too much lettering that's a lot bigger, but there's maybe some that's about 4 centimeters, and you could do more, but I think we're still wanting to keep that really simple font. Is that right, Andrew? So you're still wanting to keep the really kind of simple style of font.
Yeah, it's because it's easy to read. That's all.
Yeah.
It's, it's like the if you do it lowercase or not capitals, it traditionally in graphics it is easier to read lowercase than it is uppercase. One person said that in the chat, but I think in the case of stitching, for me anyway, it seems to read better and it seems to work better in capitals, and often it's just one word or 2 words. There's not masses of lettering. It's not like you're reading a novel or something like that. It's a phrase or a heading. That it's more like that. So that's when capitals come into their own.
I think as well, because there's generally a bit more space between when you're doing the designs, like the likes in the middle there, the spear ad that's in the middle, there's generally more space between the letters there than there would be if you were, if it was written down on a page.
Yeah, I mean,
that helps to make it more clear, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the middle one is probably, I would say, is a bit clearer than the top one, partly because it's slightly more spaced out, so that makes a difference. Whereas but the Iona one at the bottom, I would say that's a little bit more difficult to read because it's got the sort of pinky red round, giving it a shadow. It's nice, but it just makes it slightly more difficult to read. It's really interesting when you get into it, sort of like what makes it readable and what doesn't make it readable. But I'd say the most readable one in those 3 is probably the middle one. But I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, it's just but it's but it's meant to be. It's meant to be for stitch, so the stitch has a charm of its own. So it's that's a big part of it as well. It's not like the printed word or something. It's not like, again, like reading a book. This is very different because it's stitch.
Okay. So color as well. Just thinking about what color helps to make it legible, and maybe you don't think that one's legible, Angie. Then I chose the one that's got tweed.
I'm not saying it's not legible. I'm just saying it's less legible. That's
less legible.
All 3 are very legible, but I'm saying, but when you get into this sort of thing, for me anyway, it's like it's really tiny little things that nobody else will notice, and I can be quite obsessive about things like this, So, I mean, I talk for it for hours, to be honest, because it's interesting. I put a lot of words into these tapestries. I like words, but I think words are important. But it's how you do it. It makes it interesting.
And yeah, it is. And I mean, with the color, it is really just common sense, and you know, about putting darker shades against the linen and lighter colored tweeds, and then think about using lighter shades of yarn.
Yeah,
against
so
darker
like the
tweeds.
like the bottom one, if that yellow text was white text, it would be more readable, but it wouldn't be as attractive. So
Yeah.
which one is right? You know what I mean? It's like the yellow is really nice because there's yellow in the the tweed underneath it. But if you did it white, it'd be clearer. You know, traditionally most type or letter forms are in black. So most
Yeah.
people are used to black, like you've got with Scarabry Orkney, that's in almost black because that's how when you read something, it tends to be that color. But you could, but obviously adding color to it, like the yellow to the bottom one, is more attractive than either black. Wouldn't, I don't think black would work in that tweed at all. White would maybe work, or another light color, or you know, maybe a bright green or something. I don't know. I mean, it's like it's all, you got to make these judgments. Each stitch has got to make their own judgments, you know, about what it is. But it's just as long as it's clear, that's the important thing.
Yeah. So as long as you can read it.
Yeah, but don't go over the top.
Transferring letters to the fabric. So I think it is good to always have something to work from when you're going to be doing your lettering, because it's so easy. It's a bit like if you're you know, when you're learning to write and you kind of, or if you're trying to fit writing into a small space, you know, you always end up starting bigger and then getting smaller towards the end. So if you've got that guide, you know, if you've got a pencil line on the linen, or if you use stitch and tear paper as your guide on tweed or darker fabrics, then it just keeps you right in terms of the spacing, and you just know where you are with it, and you don't run out of space and then try to squeeze everything together. So
of course, the big thing about words is the spelling.
yeah,
You know?
I hope that this one is spelled. I hope
yeah, that's right. So it's like I'm dyslexic, so I can often get the spelling wrong, and I have to double, triple check, and it still sometimes gets through me, and I still put it down wrong. So it's, you know, getting it, and what people will pick up on when they look at these tapestries is the spelling that will tell you that you spelt it wrong. They'll be convinced they're right and you're wrong, and then I've done that before, and then I've gone away and checked it, and it's I was right, but that person was wrong. But then other times I get it wrong and other people are right. So it's like, you know, it's a really, that's probably a crucial part of lettering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I've spelt Spiora right. If we have any Gaelic speakers or on the Zoom call, I'm sure somebody will let me know if I haven't spelt it right, but I think that is the correct spelling. So the stitch and tear paper is really good, actually, and that one is it's called Golden Threads and Yellow Quilting Paper, and it's great for transferring designs onto tweed as well, or just darker fabrics where you can't use a light box or a window as a light box. You can use the stitch and tear paper, and it's very easy. I know a couple of stitchers said to me that they were gonna try with baking paper and tissue paper. So I'm not quite sure. They haven't got back to me yet to let me know whether that worked or not. But this stuff is specifically for hand stitching, stitch and tear, and it works even with very delicate hand stitching. You just pin it on, stitch around it, and then you very gently tear it away, and so it's quite good for just transferring a design. It can work with lettering or a drawing. So that was everything for lettering that we wanted to talk about. And obviously we can have questions at the end if you want to ask any more questions about lettering for your panel or for a journey stone that you're doing. So on to faces. So as I was putting this together, I realized there's actually quite a variety of design styles of faces in the tapestry. So you know, you've got kind of profiles, front views of faces, side views of faces, and then you've got faces that are kind of hidden within landscapes. And so there's different stitch possibilities for each of the different one. So again, like we were saying at the beginning with lettering, you know, it's difficult to give one hard or a handful of hard and fast rules, because faces are quite different throughout the panels and throughout the different sort of styles in which they're shown. It's just to give you some suggestions of and ideas about how you could do that. Would you agree with that, Andrew? There isn't a kind of hard and fast rule for how to do these faces?
No, there's not a hard and fast rule. There's not a hard and fast rule about anything that any of the tapestries that do. It's all about interpretation. But the one in the middle, the face, you've got a different eye style there. That's because you know, like Book of Kells and earlier drawings, that's how they used to draw eyes. You know, whereas the other ones are more, I don't know, more slightly more realistic, I would say, but not really realistic, but they're a bit more. You've got an eyelid, you know, whereas the one in the middle, the warrior, he's got that sort of like very simple shape for an eye, which is taken from early manuscripts and things like that.
Yeah, okay. What I've got for these is I've just got some of the stitching that people have already been doing, so that we can see. So this one's more about sort of profiles, or when people have got a line for, you know, that you don't have to stitch the face. You know, I think in the Great Tapestry of Scotland you just had a line, did you, Andrew?
Yeah, there was no filling in unless there was a coloured face, or there was an Asian face, or whatever. There was, if you were to, but generally the idea was to, if you didn't colour in at all, then you weren't actually making a reference to white or black or coloured or whatever. It's like but I don't know if that quite worked though. But it was but as you will see later on, there's some really nice stuff going on in this tapestry, which is really more interesting.
Yeah, but to be clear for people, if they don't want to stitch in if they don't want to stitch in the face, they don't have to stitch in the face. If they
there
want
is no
to.
golden rule. There's no golden rules ever.
Yeah, I just know, because I know that a lot of people have asked me that, so it's good to just to clear that up for people. So and as you can see from this, there's different ways of doing you know, faces as well, and kind of keeping it really simple, or, you know, still having a profile on the one on the left hand side, but using a little bit more you know, different stitches for the eyebrows and the eyes, things like that.
There's a lot of them are profiles, but again, profiles are much easier to do for stitch, because when I'm designing for stitch, it's all about simplifying it all the time, and a profile is probably by far the easiest way to do a face, as opposed to a 3/4 view or a straight on view, because they're just more complicated. That's all. That's why I get a lot of profiles.
Yeah. So I put these as side views, but I suppose that could also be profile, but these are just the ones that I had stitching for. So these are just some fabulous examples of beautiful stitching that stitchers have done for faces, using lots of different techniques. So there's lots of long and short in the on the image on the left hand side, and the eyes are filled in and the eyebrows are filled in, so it's quite different. And the effect to, you know, if you just had a stitched line around the edge.
This never really happened in the Great Tapestry of Scotland or any other tapestries, to be honest. It's only this one where you've got people who can fill them in, and they're really nice, you know, but it's a lot of work, but they're really, really nice, you know.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and all the different textures, especially in the beard there as well. And I think I don't know whether it gives it they give them a little bit more expression when they're filled in.
Yeah, definitely.
The kind of feeling that you get from the stitches there.
They're gorgeous.
And then on the right hand side, this is the kelp worker, and the hands and the face, the arms and the arms and the hands and the face have been done, and I'm sure it's brick stitch that they've used. If there's anyone on the call from the group, they can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that's brick stitch, and it just looks really effective the way that they've done it. You know, it's beautiful. Just gives a little bit of expression, but you know, it's quite soft as well at the same time.
I mean, it's worth saying, Kirstie, that when other people have seen these pictures online or wherever else, a lot of people are now making comments about how great the stitching is.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
Highland Tapestry. I'm getting a lot of that. It's like, wow, just look at that. It's just so stunning. I get that all the time, you know, when it's been stitched. So, I mean, it's just, it's the stitching generally just really gorgeous.
So Sharon's asking, would you stitch the whole face and then stitch the eyes, eyelids, etc. on top? I think it really depends how you're doing it, which stitches you're using as kind of what you would do. I think like on the left hand side, with all of that long and short, I would probably put in all of the outline, the eye and the eyebrow and all of that first, and then stitch around it. I think it just depends what you're doing, and I would say that on the right hand side, with the brick stitch, and then I think they might have added the eye and the eyebrow afterwards, but maybe put the profile in first. So I think it depends what it is you're planning to do with the face, but we can have a little bit more of a conversation about that afterwards, if you like, in just a minute when we come back to the full screen. So, and the next one I've got is faces in the landscape. So you've got two different approaches here as well. So on the left hand side, that's the Glencoe panel, which is with the Loch Arbor group, and the Old Manor Store on the right hand side, where they've got these faces in the landscape. So obviously that's kind of they're just adapting their stitching technique and what they're choosing to the design of the panel, I think. And they're both beautifully stitched, you know, in quite different ways. So I think that's why saying it's just suggestions of what you can do, rather than saying you have to do a face like this or you have to do a face like that, because from the beginning we haven't said you have to do a face like this or like that. And this is what people have done. They've brought these amazing creations to us, so and they really work, you know, they work really, really well. So I think a lot of it is about looking at your panel and seeing where is the face and what is the kind of style of the panel, and what's going to work for one panel might be different than something for another panel, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense, Andrew?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's just interesting. It's when you do a close up of, say, the Glencoe panel there, but when you see the whole panel, it looks even more gorgeous than it is here, because you see the whole thing. So it's all about context. It's all about you know, the Old Manor Store panel there, which is looking fabulous as well. You know, the lettering there looks fine there, but when you put it in the context of the whole panel, it looks even better. So, you know, it's always about the whole picture of the whole panel. And also it's as the whole, all the panels when they're together will be one artwork. So it's about viewing it, you know, 50, 60 meters long, you know, the artwork in the end. So, you know, but when you put it all together, it will look really complicated, and things that seem really important really close up, when you stand back from them, they're not so important. I learned that as a mural painter. When you paint, which I did, which you paint on the street, and you can sometimes get really can really get immersed in a little tiny section of a painting. But when you stand back, it isn't really that important, because most people will not view it really close up, you know. And the same with the tapestries. Some people will go up really close to a tapestry and look at it, but generally they'll stand about 2 or 3 feet away from to view it. They won't come that close to it. So when you're stitching it, you're really close to it, and you think, oh my, is this right? Is this wrong? And am I doing it right? But actually, when you stand back from it, it looks completely different, you know. And that's how most people will view it. So it's always about also when I used to teach graphics, it's like teaching the students was like, you know, when you get a message on the side of a bus, you only look at it for a nanosecond, and also it doesn't have to be, the tiny details don't really matter. It's about where it's the sight lines, where you're viewing the artwork from, or the advertising from. So when you view the tapestry, you have to remember that most people will stand a couple of feet away from it a lot of the time. So, well, you might get obsessed about something, but in the end, you have to be that close to do it. But most people will view it from a distance. If that makes any sense, my ramblings there.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, and then there's the odd one of us like me, who I go to things like this and I do stare at them really closely, be it for ages, just because I like all of this, you know. So you will get people as well who will look at all of that detail because they love that.
Yeah, but I think they've worked out that, you know, that I think the calculation is most people who will come to view these in Inverness Castle will not spend more than 2 minutes in front of a panel. You know, if you're going to spend an hour and a half visiting Inverness Castle, you know, when you go around the tapestry, you know, 2 minutes is probably too much. You know, most people won't view it, they won't spend 2 minutes in front of it. But you and I, Kirstie, would spend ages looking at something. And I'm sure a lot of stitchers will spend hours and hours and hours talking about the tiniest minutiae detail. But actually, most people who, when they come to see the Great Tapestry of Scotland, don't go into that detail. But when a stitcher comes to view the Great Tapestry of Scotland, yes, they go right up and they're really critical, and they go, no, that's not being well stitched. Well, I could have done this. It could have been done. Blah blah blah. But for most folk, that isn't the case. Yeah.
Okay. That, I think that is that's all the slides that I've got to share for that tonight. We'll come back together and we can take questions if anyone has got questions. Please put your hand up if you've got a question, Carol. Oh, you're on mute, Carol.
Right, there we are.
There we go.
Because we've faffed around with our journey stones, so that they're actually, Jan spent ages tracing off each stone and then drawing in the north, south, east and west. So they're orientated. So all the illustrations in the journey stones are going to be vertical. So you're not going to have to stand on your head to read the bottom ones the right way up. You know, they all will follow around. Because space is quite small, some people have put lettering on and it is quite tiny. But if they did it at a centimetre, there wouldn't be much room for the other stitching. And I have said to people, it's going to be viewed from a distance. And if they can't read the writing, it's actually the embroidery they're looking at, not necessarily where it says the Isles of the Dead or Blackwater Dam or whatever. And if we were to put the writing on the outside of the journey stones, there wouldn't be enough space between them to do that. So people are going to have to live with the way ours have been done. And the point Andrew made about the faces, yes, we've had quite a bit of discussion about the faces of the Glencoe panel because they're all in the rock. And actually, a friend of mine who was viewing the panel part done said, are there really faces in the rock? She was born along the road from here. You know where I live. She was born along the road. Can you really see those faces? Duh. But yes, the faces that we've done, because of the nature of the panel, are filled. And
yeah, and they look
I'm
beautiful,
pleased
you
with
know,
them. Yeah,
they're beautiful, and that's the you know, the point, yeah, of what we're
yes,
saying, that there's these different ways of doing it, and had
yes,
kind of come in at the beginning and said, oh, all the faces have to be done with this stitch, and they all have to be a profile. You know, you might have done that very differently, and so you know, but for your panel and for where those faces are in the landscape, that stitching works beautifully, you know. So that's why we're kind of hesitant to say this is a rule,
yes,
you know, because it can really hinder people's
yes,
creativity doing that. So, you know, no, they look beautiful, the faces that you've done. And I think with the lettering that you've got, and that's small, you know, and that's what we were saying, and hopefully I'll just say it again so it's really clear, if there's stitching that has been done already and there's lettering that has been done already, we're not asking you to take, nobody's asking anyone to take that out. It's just about if you want to do stitching and lettering and you haven't yet done it, or you're wanting to add it, these are things that you can think about.
yes.
You know, all of the lettering we've seen has been beautiful, you know, on the journey stone. So it's not as sort of saying you need to, that anyone needs to take anything out.
No,
you know, and there will be people, whilst, you know, like you said, that the journey stones that yours have got, and maybe they have done much smaller than 1 centimetre and they can't read it from a distance. But and I totally agree with Andrew, you will get people who'll just be there for 2 minutes and they might not take in all the content of the smaller writing on those journey stones, but you will get some people who will go closer to it, and they will, so, you know, because they might be looking for it, they might know about it, or they might just be really interested in that stitching. So
yes.
I wouldn't say anyone needs to take anything out. So I don't want anyone to take tonight's tutorial as I was saying that at all.
Now, can I just back that up? I completely agree with Kirstie. I mean, if you've done stitching, wording that's really small, and you know, it can be like, you know, with the Great Tapestry of Scotland, there's lots of secret messages that are hidden all over the place, and you've really got to look for them to find them, and that's part of the charm of the Great Tapestry of Scotland. And it'll be the same with the lettering that's, you know, is less than 1 centimetre, maybe a wee bit hard, but it's got a real charm and beauty to it. And it will, and people could, you know, people will go to hunt that word out and will say, oh, there it is there, you know. So, and I think the point you're making, Carol, about, it's the really faces in those rocks. You know, I've had people who've seen my designs and they go, I never saw those faces before. Now I see them, and in my head I'm thinking, well, it's really obvious. Why can't you see it? You know, but actually, people don't read the whole. You know, they don't read the whole panel. You know, they're not. But that's not a failure. No. That's part of the charm. So, like, you know, if you've got lettering, it's too small, or it's slightly the wrong way, or it's a bit awkward, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It's fine. It's got a real charm to it. And all the journey stones I've seen so far, they've all got that charm to it. They're all absolutely gorgeous. You put them all together, and it's going to look amazing. So I wouldn't worry about anything, please. I mean, you mustn't.
No, I'm not worrying about anything. I'm not paid enough to worry. The other question I was going to ask, with each panel, will there be any sort of descriptive passage? You know, when you look at the Great Tapestry book, there's a picture and a page about that actual illustration. And I just wondered if there would be a brief description alongside each individual panel. You know, I know it's the Old Man of Store, and I know it's the Cross of Iona and various other things. It's Glencoe. And I just wondered whether there would be just a description of the place and the implications of the panel.
Well, there is there's a narrative, isn't there, Andrew?
There's a narrative, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But the narrative will be sweeping at sometimes, and then other times it will be really accurate, and then it's all about creating a general story for the whole thing. But there are several levels to this. I mean, this is another subject, really. It's not lettering of faces. But this is, there's the Stitcher's stories, there's the Alistair's narrative, there's actually the content of the panels themselves, and within that, there's loads of different stories that could, you could probably spend a whole day just talking about one panel. You know what I mean? Because there's a whole series of different levels to each panel, and how do you record that? It's a big task. So, like what Carenza's doing at the moment, where she's asking people in the journey stones to put the information into as a website where you can put your journey stone, and then you do an explanation of what the journey stone is about. I would really encourage people to do that, because that's the only way we're going to be able to gather that. At the moment, that's the only way to gather those stories. But there's so many stories in this whole tapestry already. It's massive,
Yes.
so it's a big task. It's a big task. But it'll be a thing that will go on for quite a while. So again, I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. But yeah, the challenge is to make the narration. So again, it's all about the visitor who doesn't know about the Highlands. They're going to read this thing, and the narration guides them through the 52 panels, or the 22 are in the castle, but also are in the community.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
Thank you. I know this is about faces, but on our tapestry with the Clava clan, so it's the lady in front of the stone, Andrew, with a lot of arms showing,
Yes.
so a lot of flesh.
Not too much flesh.
Not too much flesh. No.
Steady on.
But too much flesh probably to leave with no stitching. It would be a lot of white, showing through. So my questions are, what advice or what stitches do you think would work best on such a large area as these arms? And then whatever we stitch the arms in, would you use that same stitching for her face?
So it's a good question, and I think that the kelp worker image that you saw, I could go back and share it again if you want to see it. They have got similar face and arms, sort of amount of arms that are showing, and that looks really effective, the stitch that they've used for that. I think that I would probably steer clear, even though I love long and short, I think I would steer clear of long and short, because I think it'll take you a long time to do those arms. I think that could be quite frustrating. But the brick stitch that the by You group used on the kelp worker looks really effective and actually really quite gentle. You would imagine that brick stitch was going to look a lot more structured, but because they've used the really pale color, it doesn't. It just gives it a really gentle look, which might actually be really quite nice with your lady on in your panel.
And you would use that on her face as well?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they've done. Do you want me to share the screen again so you can see it?
That would be helpful.
Yeah, because it's really lovely what they did. Let's have a look. It's just down here. So it's the one on the right hand side, with the purple headscarf. So and I can probably I could send you some pictures of this if you wanted.
Can you enlarge it so you can sort of see the
know.
stitching?
Yeah, let me just have a look and see if I can make it bigger. Oops, it's gone blank. Has it gone blank for you as well?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know why it's done that. Try again. Right, hang on.
Gone blank again.
I don't know why it's done that. Usually do it. Oh, there we go. Is that better?
That's better.
Can you see it a little bit bigger now?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, also, it almost looks like they've got shading there. You know, have they used different colors in there, or is it just the light?
I think it is just the light. Because when I saw it, it's all the kind of whiter color. But it does look, you're right, it does look like shading, but I don't think they have used a different yarn color around here. I think it is just from when the picture's been taken. It's cast a shadow on it. But what I could do is, and what I have done with other groups for different things, is put groups in touch with each other to share some images. So if you've got a kind of similar you know, face and arms kind of thing, and you want to have a little look at their panel in more detail, and they can maybe send some closer up pictures to you.
I just see it. Somebody called Sue has just said it's all one color. I guess it's maybe their group. That would be really good, Sue.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. So I thought it was all one color. Yeah, and just happy to send you some close-up photos. So yeah, it looks really effective. I mean, I was quite struck by that when I saw it, because I thought there's a real gentleness to the features, I think. And I think maybe because they've used a grey as well as the you know, for the eyebrow. And the eye, it's quite soft with the white, rather than a harsher kind of contrast. So
yeah,
you know, if it was black with the white, I think it would look quite different. So I would give that a try, and even kind of sample a little bit before you start it, because I think one of the things that I would say, if you're going to stitch a face, is that it's worth sampling a little bit before you do it, to check the color, that you're happy with the color, and that you're happy with the choice of stitch. Because a lot of these, if you've got really intensive stitching, like long and short, probably the brick stitch wouldn't be quite as bad. But if you do it and then you decide, actually, I'm not too sure about this color, or I'm not too sure about this technique, and you take it out, it can leave kind of needle marks on the linen, and then it can be really difficult to, you know, you have to then stitch over the top of it. So it's just about thinking it through, maybe having a little sample go first and thinking about the color or the stitch. So that's what I would recommend, is to have a look at the pictures from another group, consider using that stitch, and those kind of colorways as well, where it's a little bit softer, and try it out before you do it on the face, because it can feel quite nerve-wracking as well when you're doing it on a face and on the hands, because like you said, it's this big expansive area. So you know, it's natural to feel that kind of apprehension about getting started, you know.
And sorry, I don't mean to hog this, but just one wee question. You know, her hands are like this, you know, there's the arm coming along and then the hands up. Would you do the sort of like, you could come along the arms one way and then change the direction of the stitching to go up the hands? Or would you have it all the same?
I think what I would do is probably, if you were using that brick stitch and see how I would be tempted to go all the way along and then continue it going up the way, rather than it being directional, if that makes sense. So I would keep
it all horizontal.
I would keep it going. Yes, I mean, I'd say that's vertical, but then that's maybe my back to front brain. But you know, so what I mean is, I can see what you mean. You're thinking it's going along horizontally. I'm thinking
along her arm.
Along the arm, and then the stitches would just get, you know, you'd add in height to that as you got to the bit
up
with
up the hands. Yeah.
Does that make sense? I could do a little drawing of what I mean, because I can see it in my head, and I could send it to you, because yeah, I'm a little bit sort of funny with directions and things like that, and the way I see things in my head. So I could do a little drawing and I could send that through. It would probably make
Great.
more sense than how I could say it. I know on the chat, one of the ladies who's in the group was saying that it was Melanie from the group who did that beautiful stitching on the face, and that she'll send through some pictures by email to me, and then I can share them on to you.
That would be great.
That would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. I'll just come out of this. Okay. Do we have any other questions at all? I've just got a thank you. It's helpful and lovely to see how things are coming on in the chat. Just check that we've got all of the questions. I think there's another comment there just saying it would be interesting to see some sort of map showing where panels were stitched and where ideas come from. I think that was when we were talking about the narrative that goes with the panels. So yeah, it definitely would be interesting to see a map. I'm sure there'll be, I mean, I'm not quite sure what will exactly be there at the end, but I'm sure that there will be some reference to where everything's been stitched, won't there, Andrew?
Yeah, but we need to encourage people to put their stories into the web page that Carenza's put on the Facebook page, or we can share that again. Because they won't be able to create the map unless we give them the information.
Yes, so that is the best way at the moment. That is the absolutely best way to share your stories in your journey, the stories that are in the journey stones, particularly because you can upload a picture and you've got space to write the story as well, and I think that will be at the moment, that is the best way for everybody to share their stories. So what I can do is we can share the link again on the Facebook forum, and then we'll pop it in one of the emails as well that's coming out. I know Ben's got lots of different emails flying out to everybody at the moment, but we'll pop it in there too for people who might not be on Facebook. And then it's quite easy, just click on the link and it takes you to a page where you can do everything. You can you just upload a picture and your story, and just because you can't reiterate enough the amount of incredible stories that there are. When you think, every time we come to these gatherings and get-togethers, there's just wonderful stories, but we can't do anything with them if we don't have if we don't have a record of what they are and who's stitched them or who's telling the story. So yeah, if we can encourage you all to do that, it would be fantastic. I think it does say on there as well about where you're from, so it should be a record of all of that. Right, okay, has anybody else got any questions before we say goodbye? Has it been helpful? Has that been... Yes. Good. Okay.
Thank you for all your work you put in.
Oh,
very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. It's so nice to see you all, and we've got lots more online sessions coming, so we'll see you all again soon, and can get up to date with where you're all up to with your panels and answer questions and things like that too. So and please don't feel, if it's a long time until you're getting a Zoom call, but you feel like you need one before then, or if you've got questions, you can email with questions, or you can email and ask to have a Zoom call with Andrew and I for your group. So we're happy to do that as well. So just remember that. Oh, I better switch the recording off.